Hello, everyone. Thank
Hi,
you so thank you so much for tuning in to the Hen House at Home Fall Book Tour. I am Toby Harper, Deputy Director at Red Hen Press.
and I'm Monica Fernandez, the Media Manager.
This is our last event of our series. Thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in and week out. We have an exciting program for you today, featuring authors from our Alaska-based imprint Boreal Books and hosted in partnership with the Alaska-based Homer Bookstore. We're going to be featuring a conversation led by Boreal editor Peggy Shumaker. We're also thrilled to welcome Erin Hollowell, author of Every Atom, Mia Hefner, author of Under Nushagak Bluff, and Marie Tozier, author of our most recent Boreal book, Open the Dark. And to kick off the event, I'll be bringing Peggy up to the screen. Hello, Peggy.
Hello, welcome everybody.
Hi, Peggy.
So good to see you. Yeah. So first we just wanted to know, could you tell us a bit about just Boreal Books in general, introduce to our audience who might not know, and why we felt it was important to showcase these narratives?
Sure. In 2006, 2007, Kate Gale approached me and said, would you be interested in editing a series of books by Alaska writers? And that became, that effort became the Boreal Books series. We now have 20 books in the series, which is very exciting. Let's see. Oh, and at the same time, she also approached Eloise Klein Healy to put together Arctoy books, bringing out a book a year by a lesbian writer. So Boreal and Arctoy are twins, and we were born at the same time.
Lovely.
Yeah, and so I began to look for manuscripts, fiction, poetry, nonfiction, that were either set in Alaska or written by someone who lives in Alaska. And most of them have been written by people who live in Alaska. It turned out they were not difficult to find. And we have truly excellent writers working in Alaska. You get to hear 3 of them today.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Peggy.
You're welcome.
All right. I'll bring up Marie Tozier, who will be our first reader.
It's my pleasure to introduce to you Marie Tozier, who is Inupiaq. She lives in Nome, though she's coming to us today from Seattle, where she's been having some medical treatment. Marie teaches at the Northwest campus. She's taught sewing and knitting and kivyut preparation and writing. So that's quite a lot of varied talents that Marie has. She has lived subsistence. She has raised 5 kids. 5 kids, is that one right?
7.
7 kids in Nome. Yeah, 7 kids in Nome. And I'll bet you're homesick and ready to go home pretty soon.
Yes, we certainly are.
So I was excited to find your manuscript, or I was excited when you sent me your manuscript. These poems were written over quite a long time, it seems, and it also seems that they deal with a wide array of subjects. Would you like to read a little from your book?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you, Peggy. So I have a few poems to read. I'm going to start with Grandmother's Bible. Grandmother had a King James Bible. In its front pages, she had written each of our names and birth dates. She ran her hand down the list of deaths and showed me where to find our Eskimo names. The list in Inupiaq of who we were named after, Eskimo names given to remember dear friends, siblings lost too young, esteemed elders. There is no why, only who. And then my next poem is called A Quackshruck. One spring, sandhill cranes flew into sight. Having landed, they became hard to spot. Their bodies and wings dirt brown, the color of dead willow leaves. That fall, the crane wife fed her husband cranberries. He balked. He made fun of the tiny morsel. At night, while he slept, she dressed his eyes in red berry pulp, staining him for life. The next poem is called Old Time Truck. Submerged in a pond off the Nome Council Highway, rust-colored, time eating away at the body. A backdrop each year for pairs of loons performing. All that remains now, a faint memory, a story, Old Man Kigrook and his grandson lost while driving. And the next poem is actually quite long. It makes up the entire middle section of my book. And this one is called, They Tried to Teach Me History. The parents of these Indian children are ignorant and know nothing of the value of education. John S. Ward, U.S. Indian Agent, 1886. The beginning, first steps, declaring what is, naming it. Ugruk, bearded seal. Parents, defenders, teach a child by example, by witness. Grandfather said, when a young man comes of age, he must learn to hunt. Of, the Bible says, and Jesse begat David the king, and aren't we all the sons of Adam? Each one. These, right here, as if it was happening today. Wait, the school teacher stands up at City Hall, begs for money to do her job, then blames the parents when she fails. Indian, Alaska Native, Hopi, Dene, Inuk, the real people. Children, not vessels, we fill them up, not understanding what's useless can't be poured out. They're drowning. Are is better than were. My brother was lost and now he's gone. Ignorant. Ignorance another word for why can't you do it my way? Less the guilt. And what follows after dismissal is grief, disaster, destruction. Brown faces on the street corner, middle of winter, waiting for bars to open. No, the difference between life and death is the difference between the truth and a lie. You can't take it back. Not today, not tomorrow, forever. Nothing, everything taken away, our land, our ways, our children, gone. Abandoned kushki, sod house, returning to earth. Of, tell it to your children and let your children tell it to their children and their children to the next generation. Remember. The, definite, specified by circumstance, unneeding of recognition or approval or equivocation. I am enough. Value. What is the fair price of happiness? Can it even be measured? Unacknowledged injustices are wounds left unhealed, left to fester, warm to the touch. Of, songs unsung hang in the air, no ears remain to claim them. Make them listen. Education. Would it matter if I laid out the process for cutting seal, splitting the carcass, separating the blubber from the meat, which is dried in the wind and sun, butterflied open from tail to neck, meat hung till black, backbone hacked, intestines braided to be cleaned, water run through them, water to wash away the sin of being. The next poem is called Grandmother Told Me a Story. She said, Dan and I, when we were young, and there was only your mom and Lucille, Glenn, and Elsie, we would pack them over to Edith's house, long time ago in Deering. We'd play games and visit all night. Finally, when it got too late, Edith would make something up. She said, TTGH, and we had to guess what it meant. 1 year before Christmas, Gram got sick. As she lay in the hospital bed, unconscious, we sang hymns for her. Friends visited. Her remaining children returned. She woke up. She smiled and laughed. She said, "Time to go home." And the next poem is called Seasons. Seasons roll into each other. Spring's bud turns summer's leaf. Ripe berries wait on the bush, fall to winter. In between, a long pause while the moon turns full. And this is another little poem. It's called, the title is almost longer than the poem. For the newly elected school board member from anywhere but here. Welcome to the ancestral land of my people. We already know you. Bossy white woman thinks she owns the world, rules the school, wags her finger in our face, preaches love if only we'd listen. This poem is about my grandfather. It's called Man of Virtue. My grandfather takes the Bible at its word, James 1:27, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction. 80 years old, he travels the smaller villages to comfort those in mourning, speaks of grown men as orphans, those who need care. He plays the accordion and sings the old hymns they all remember. And for my last poem, I'm going to read Marriage. Marriage. Toke and I spend Saturday mornings making donuts. I mix the sourdough by hand, then roll it out in portions because we've quadrupled the recipe. That could be defined as a Tosher thing, wanting there to be enough for everyone. Toke fries them, patient as the oil heats, then quick with the batches until we're done. Each donut a golden ring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie. And we'll get a chance to talk with you some more after the other two readers. I really appreciate your poems. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
You're welcome.
Hey, Peggy.
Hey, Mia. Our next reader is Mia Hefner, who, let's see, she was trained as a civil engineer and has done engineering projects around Alaska. She lives now in Anchorage, but she's been out in the field recently. Her novel, Under Nushagak Bluff, deals with, in many regards, many of the issues that we're facing today. Mia, are you going to be able to find an excerpt? I think I have great sympathy for the fiction writers and the prose writers in general, because you have to find an excerpt and we poets get to pick whole poems.
Yeah.
So
I got a section, a small section. It's not going to be long.
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. So where I'm going to start is kind of in the middle. Well, yeah, it's kind of in the middle. It's where Ann Girl is the mother, and Ellen is waking up to her mother in the kitchen, and this is what happens next. Ellen understood that the day was going to be different by the way the morning light bled through the window and danced on her feet. She heard her mom shuffling in the other room as there were scratching against the floor. Maybe she was moving the table, or maybe she was pacing. Ellen couldn't be sure. She squeezed her toes tightly and counted to 10. 10 seconds of warmth. Ellen? Almost 20 seconds. Ellen, get dressed. We're going for a walk. It was that tone that didn't want or need a response. That much Ellen knew, and she rushed to pull on her stockings and her shirt. She pulled a curtain from her bedroom doorway to see her mom sitting at the table, wearing 3 layers of clothes. Her normally thin chest was shaped like a pillow, and both sleeves of her parka were stretched thin. Her frown was so tight that a river could flow through the creases down her forehead. In her hand, she held her sewing kit that John had given her years ago, Ellen laughed. You look like one of them fat beavers. Let's go home. Ann girl raised her arms. Oofty, it's hot in here. Let's go. Ellen surveyed the room and noticed that everything, salt, honey, mason jars, were set carefully on the table as if they were set for a still picture. She looked out the window and saw the shape of waves against the blue sky and wondered what bird had shit on her mom during the night. Home? We're home. Ann girl moved to the door. He's flying, always flying here and there. Let's go where it's quiet. Why all the clothes? Ann girl grunted and continued to gather small items. And look, the rest of the eggs and string. It's cold at my mom's house. You should take some clothes too, or your feet might rot off. Ellen shuddered. Eli, Jairek lived there. Who told you that? Ann's girl's head snapped up. Her eyes were sharp and beady, reminding Ellen of a seagull stare. Maybe that's why her mom stuffed herself in all those clothes, to hide seagull wings sprouting from her armpits. Maybe June or Maddie, Ellen rolled her shoulders. She thought everyone knew that her dead grandmother's house was full of haunted beings. How could it not be when every summer it seemed to sink deeper and deeper into the grasses? Fine, stay here then, Ann girl said. She wiped a trail of sweat from her brow. I don't want you if you can't work anyway. Her mother's words stung, and Ellen scraped her mind for reasons why Ann girl should take her. She didn't want to be alone, waiting for bears while her father was flying about. You can't leave me here. Papa's never home. Ann girl didn't respond, but walked out the door, saying nothing. She moved stiffly as the many layers of clothes seized her joints. Ellen ran after her, leaving the door open. She hoped her dad wouldn't mind. He knows where to find us? How big you think this town is? Ann girl pulled at her collar. God damn, it's hot in here. Ellen hoped no one could see her mother bobbling down the beach like Sweet Mary. But the beach between the cannery and the bluff was empty. Not a soul in sight, unless you count the seagulls charging headfirst towards one another as they fought over fish. I told him we'll move back when it snows, like it's fish camp or something. He can come down our way if he wants, Ann girl said. For now, you just need to work. The women in the village helped themselves to Marilia's house, Ann girl's new house, when they found that Ann girl and Ellen were warming its walls once again. Ellen couldn't help noticing how they came in pairs, some with kids, some with just their eyes to take a look around. They, too, thought there were Dryax in the house. She pointed out that to her mom. But all the visits were relatively quiet until Sweet Mary and Nancy fought to get in the door at the same time. Well, if you just let me in, I'll open the door wider for your fat ass, Nancy huffed, pushing her body against Sweet Mary's. Her hips sunk into Sweet Mary's thigh until it looked like there was only half of her. Sweet Mary backed up, taking all her weight with her, and muttered under her breath. But as soon as she took one step aside, she whistled slowly. Feels like death in here. She pulled a small witch underarm. Got you a kitchen witch. Norwegian kitchen witch. From one of my men at the dock. Nancy adjusted her hair. I guess it's not going to do you any good at your house, you and your men. Sweet Mary grumbled. Ellen, tea, Ann girl said. Her eyes were bright and clear from the sudden influx of visitors. And Ellen wondered how long her mom would last before she locked the door. Ellen didn't like people after too long, and she wasn't afraid to push them out the door with a handful of strips. She waved her arm around the room. Not much of a kitchen. Look, good warm stove here. What you guys think? Still in good condition. My mom took good care of it, wiping it down every night. You need to open these windows, Sweet Mary said. She took a sharp breath and heaved the window open. Something's not right. Light flooded the room and found corners Ellen didn't know had existed. And then, in one breath, she felt her history spill itself into the colors around her. Greens and grays, all in the shape of a beach. Her Nan was here. Your mom is a raven, huh? Ann girl's eyes met Ellen's. How you know that? I told you, Ellen tapped her head. Gyrax, this place is full of them. Sweet Mary whistled again long. Eli, creepy one she is. And that's where I'm going to stop.
Thank you. When we talk afterwards, I hope that you'll tell us a little about where this is set and the kind of small community that you know about. That's very You did a really good job selecting. Thank you, Mia.
All right, thanks.
And next we will hear from Erin Coughlin Hollowell, who lives in Homer. She has many jobs. The two most professional ones, I say, will be the executive director of Story Night, which is a writing retreat for women, which is quite exciting to have in Alaska. The other is as director of the Kachemak Bay Writers Conference, a tremendously important gathering of writers. It's really important for the Alaska community, and it's important for the community of writers. Erin writes mostly poems, but a few, let's see, grant proposals and a few, essays and letters and various other things. She has her MFA from the Rainier Writing Workshop. Erin?
Thanks, Peggy. I'm going to read one from my first book, which is a Boreal book, but it's very glary, Pause Traveler. I'm going to read the titular poem, Pause Traveler. I chose 4 poems today that all have to do with the landscape influencing the mood of the speaker. Pause Traveler. Some evenings come suddenly with the hush of unasked for embrace. Small lights blear weakly on the houses, artificial stars for this season of long darkness. No one dares travel down the road between the tombs of heaped snow. Ice crazes the surface of windows. The earth shifts. Everything is cracked. Nothing is perfect. Let it suffice that there is some green gathered from the forest, some remembrance we meant to live forever in this long season of silence. If we knew how the story ended, how could we keep living it? My second book, Boreal book, Every Atom, with this beautiful cover, is about my mother and how we navigated her increasing dementia, and then she passed away. A lot of it long distance. We had to navigate it long distance because I was here in Alaska and they were in upstate New York. And the titles of each one of these poems are lines from Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. All goes onward and outward, nothing collapses. My mother asks me to call my father, tell him to come and get me. My father is sitting next to her on the sofa as she says this. He is the one who handed her the phone. Who remains when the labels wear away? The elderly man who tells me not to worry is no longer her husband. He dons a stranger's face each morning. The woman who cannot bear to open her eyes and see the unfamiliar room has wandered beyond wife, beyond mother. The snow today sweeps across the landscape, blotting out the terrain around my house. First, the mountains disappear, then the water, the trees on the other side of the road itself. And now all is white, a closed space, snow hissing against the window panes. The world we are born into is not the one that clings to us as we leave. White. Remember the crabapple tree that bloomed in the backyard? Such extravagance of pale petals. There's a photograph of my mother and me standing beneath it. I was 13. I plunged toward everything. She was perfectly still. Mother, I'm telling the truth. There is white and the pause that surrounds it. Snow's small blossoming into the night. I find that Alaskans write a lot about birds. Maybe everybody does, but I thought I'd pull a bird book. At one point, my mother didn't ever really know who she was talking to on the phone, and she would say things that were kind of funny. And in this one, The joke is she says, "You are my favorite," when I was definitely not her favorite. Those winged purposes. A flock of birds, all angular silhouettes, swoop and wheel in the sky beyond the glass. I am half listening to the sound of your television, thousands of miles away, waiting for you to respond to my question about your breakfast. Waiting for any response, really, that might indicate that you know who I am. The birds plunge and glide into the line of alders that gnarl beside a stream cut deep into the hillside, earth sandy and soft here. When you say, "You are my favorite," I laugh, shaking my head, splaying my hand against the window to feel the cold air held at bay. And then you laugh too. Afterward, I walk outside, my hair tangling in branches as I peer into the ditch the stream has dug. There are stones the size of babies' skulls that the water has dodged around. The wrist-width rivulet presses deeper still. This is how time moves, carving through a life, rearranging and searching for bedrock. This is how time moves, dozens of small wings that burst forth together and then dwindle, distant specks that disappear from the eye. And one more, an autumn poem. This one actually fits almost the day today. Seasons pursuing each other. Autumn morning ghost moon, like a cliched currach indeed, but no less alchemical. Frost in all the footsteps and hollow places. A few black flies bumble against the sun-warmed clapboard, looking for a crevice to spend the winter. Yes, it's coming, and for all of us. When I look in the mirror, straight back from my temples, paths of light twist in my hair. 3 cords of hardwood, stacked and seasoned, await their ashes. The cold air tastes of smoke, that black bitterness so latched to absence. But not yet. A few frivolous pansies still bloom, gaudy and, for now, invincible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. And here we all are. I'd just like to ask each one of you, if you don't mind, and you can talk about other things as well, but first I'd just like to get a sense of where you live, because it really matters. And Alaska is enormous and varied. And Marie, can you describe Nome for us?
Oh dear. Sure. So I grew up in Nome. Nome is a rural town, and the only way that you can get there is to fly in, and it's usually Alaska Airlines. There are, what have we said? I think between 3,500 and 4,000 people that live in Nome. And one of the things about Nome is that there are, I don't know why that's popped into my head. There are as many bars in Nome as there are churches. Oh, that's an odd one. What else? I grew up in a large family, so that's like where my poetry focuses, in Open the Dark. And we grew up hunting, fishing, picking berries. Summers were spent, at the fish cache having picnics. And winters were usually spent listening to my grandparents tell stories about their lives and what it was like when they were growing up. And Toke and I were lucky enough that my grandparents lived long enough so that our children got to spend quite a bit of time with them and got to hear their stories. And we feel really blessed for that, because they have a connection to them now. And then also to what I think is neat, with storytellers is that they have a connection to my grandparents, but then they also have a connection to the people that my grandparents would talk about. So their parents. Let's see, what else about Nome?
What treasure. And I was going to ask you, how long does the sea ice last?
Wow. So it's usually frozen by November, mid-November. What would you say, Tope? I have to cheat and ask my husband. He's saying December, but it will last until May. Yeah, May to June, because one of the things we do in the springtime is go seal hunting. And I have a cousin that's a year younger than me, and he was taught to hunt by my grandfather. And my grandmother taught me how to put the food away. So his name is Pete. He's the one that goes hunting, and then I would be the one to take care of the seal and put it away. And over the last couple of years, because of global warming, the ice, either it's going out sooner, so that I always get impatient and start asking Keith, well, are you going to go hunting? Are you going to go hunting? And he'd be like, have patience, Marie. I'm going when it's time. But one year he waited too long, and all of the ice went out. The snow was gone, and they did get a couple of seals, but we ended up cutting them on the beach, and there was no snow. So it was, we were putting down tarps, which was very interesting, because usually all of that was done on snow and ice.
And probably safer for being on the snow and ice.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. But yeah, so that's I think what's neat is I've been sick the last year and a half, and my oldest children have been learning to put traditional food away. Sometimes with Toke and I, and sometimes with our friends, older friends that were willing to take the kids along and teach them how to do it.
That's a wonderful thing to pass on to the next generation, so they can pass it to the next generation.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. And Mia, will you tell us about where your novel's set?
My novel is set out in Bristol Bay, in Nushagak specifically. So I grew up outside of Anchorage in Chugiak, and then my summers were spent fishing in Nushagak, basically outside of Dillingham. And that's where my mom's side of family is from. So like Marie, I kind of grew up picking berries, fishing, fish camp. Also with stories, a lot of stories, mom, grandma, mom's friends, just sitting around drinking tea. I used to think of it as gossiping, but now that, you get older, you kind of realize that there's this connection, and then it's funny to listen to as you get older too. So, my mom lives in Dillingham, and Nushagak is kind of like, where I'm from, not really from, but there's a history there.
And how much is the Yupik language still in use out there?
In the YK Delta, they use it quite a bit. In Dillingham area, I know my grandmother spoke it, and then my mom, I think, understands it, and because she's a nurse, but not as much as the YK. I mean, YK, like the little kids will come up and run to you and start, trying to teach you words that you're like, oh, okay, thank you. So, not as much, but I always know certain words, because that's my mom will certain words will pop up in her conversation.
I had a Norwegian grandfather, and so I knew all the scolding words in Norwegian, and a lot of food words, food and scolding.
Yeah, food and like, hey, come here, and and swear words. So yeah.
Thanks. And Erin, will you describe to people, because you talked about your folks being in upstate New York, and your 95-year-old father was trying to take care of your 95-year-old mother. What would it take to get from Homer to upstate New York?
4 flights. Start out Homer to Anchorage, and then and that's like just a 30-minute flight less, but then Anchorage to to usually Seattle, and then Seattle to someplace in the middle of the country, and then up to the little tiny part of upstate New York that they lived in. So it would take 2 days because you could never get, straight connections. So it wasn't ever quick to go visit there, and it was really expensive. So I would in the end, I visited them like 2 or 3 times a year. But when I first moved to Alaska, I could only afford to go like once a year, save it all up and go once.
So anybody who wants to see what Homer looks like can look at Erin's blog, Being Poetry. She is an apprentice to light. And tell us about Homer, please.
I've lived in 3 different towns in Alaska. I moved to Homer, and then my husband and I moved from Homer to Ketchikan, and then from Ketchikan, which is a rainy little town in the Panhandle, and then we joked it wasn't small and rainy enough, so we moved to Cordova, which is in Prince William Sound, and Cordova had you can only fly in or take the ferry in. And then we moved back to Homer. Homer's on Ketchikan Bay and Cook Inlet. And so from my front porch, I can see 3 different glaciers. From Story Knife, we can see all of the Ring of Fire. We can see all the volcanoes on the other side. I just love Homer for a lot of reasons, because it's an art town and there's a lot of writers here, but also because it just has a little of everything. So
it's a terrific place, and they have the incomparable Homer Bookstore. So thank you to Jenny and Sue and Lee for being one of the sponsors of this event. Let's see. I was going to say, Marie, in some of your poems, you write about things that cut to the soul, and the anger that is engendered when you say that the kids who have been filled with useless stuff can't just pour it out, and that they're drowning. It's so horrific, and yet you're able to distill it into just a few lines. Can you talk about the anger that permeates several generations and how that shows up in your poems?
Sure. I think some of it is just realizing that, the quote that's in the poem, "They tried to teach me history," is from 1886. And if you think about the biases that people had about Alaska Natives and Native Americans, they're still here. And I think that's what's so frustrating for a lot of people. We had a group in Nome of parents that wanted to do something to improve the schools in Nome. And schooling is a huge issue for Alaska Native parents. You probably know the history in Alaska with how the high schools used to be regional, and so parents would have to send their children to a boarding school, and that was fairly recently. But so I was there was a little group of parents in Nome that would get together and talk about issues with the school. And I remember I went to a friend of mine and was trying to explain to her what we were trying to accomplish. And she looked at me and she said, "Marie, I was fighting for that 20 years ago." It just blew me. I just couldn't, imagine that the population in Nome and actually probably throughout the whole state of Alaska Natives, they're just not being served by public schools. And so I think a lot of it is frustration that these things are still happening. And then just the feeling like you don't have any power, and that, that what the right thing is, and you're trying to convince everyone else what to do. And it just, it takes it takes a long time to do that, or to feel like you're accomplishing anything. And I would like to say that Nome has an immersion school for, I want to say it's either, I think it's a kindergarten immersion class that's just starting this year. And the teacher will be speaking in Inupiaq with her class, and it's amazing. And you know, I think the group that has been working on that for a couple of years has got something to be really proud of.
That's fabulous.
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think that is really insightful, and I appreciate all that you have to say about it.
Okay,
Erin,
you.
you're really involved with the literary community in Alaska, building and sustaining the literary community. Can you just talk about some of the things that you're involved with?
Okay. Ooh.
Or you want to talk about something else? I don't care.
No, that's good. I can talk a little bit about the Writers Conference and what we're working on right now. One of the things, I'm just the new director, and one of the things we did was increase the size of the advisory committee to bring in writers, Alaska Native writers, to bring in writers of color, and to bring in writers from around the state. I think that it's been too long that we have not honored the fact that we have an incredibly rich group of people writing here, and so that's kind of what I'm doing, and I take any help. Anyone who wants to help, anyone who wants to volunteer a name or say, give me a call and tell me anything, I take it, because I feel like the tiniest apprentice to this tradition, a literary tradition that's been here for millennia. And so that's kind of, a Story Knife also has a focus on including Indigenous and Alaska Native writers, not by chance, but on purpose, purposefully reaching out to that community and asking what they need, not just saying, we're going to set the table and here's your food, but saying, what is it that you need to help write? And that's kind of where I'm at.
I applaud you for all those efforts, and I know that they aren't easy. Mia, I want to talk to you about the many years it takes to put together a novel. Is your next project also a novel?
It takes a long time. For me anyway, just because I work full time as an engineer. So my next project, if I'm lucky, it will be a novel. But I try to get up really early in the morning, like 4:30, and try to write before I start work. And I'm too drained after work, but and it just takes time too. Like, I guess I love your guys' poetry, and because I'm not a poet, I'm like, ooh, nice words. But for me, it just takes a long time to try to listen to, what's going on around me and try to put that into a story and think about things that might be bothering me. So, yeah.
I have a novelist friend who says he can't start a new novel until he can hear the main character's voice. And he has to be able to hear the voice speaking before he can get rolling with the story.
Yeah, it has to be like a voice, and also like you kind of like, for me, it's also like this emotional like connection kind of. I have to be able to really feel their struggle, which is hard sometimes because in engineering, I have to turn all that off. I have to like be very, I don't know, maybe smart or there's like a dichotomy there, and it's hard sometimes to switch back and forth. But yeah.
The very first Boreal book was a book of essays by Eva Salidas, and Eva, as you all will know, was a marine biologist, and she said there were just things that writing scientific articles and even writing about her study animals, killer whales, she could not explore in the language that science allowed her. And so she had to have another kind of language. And she used the language of essays and poetry to explore that other part of her soul.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
What questions do you want to, or responses do you want to ask or responses make to one another?
I want you to announce Marie's good news about the
Marie-
Poetry Foundation.
Yeah, I got an email a couple days ago from the Poetry Foundation in Chicago, and they want permission to use 3 of Marie's poems on their website. So congratulations.
That's awesome.
Bravo.
Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome. Other good news? Well, what do you want to know from one another?
I want to know if Marie's getting any chance to write, or is she just healing and then maybe handling writing later, compartmentalizing?
Yeah, so one of the things about chemotherapy is you end up with chemo brain. And that has been really hard for me because a friend of mine asked, are you writing? I really hope you're writing. I can't wait for your next, whatever you're going to work on next. And I was like, I can't even get my brain to reach that level of thinking to where I could start to write. But I have been really careful about using a notebook. And, if things caught my eye, or, we experienced something that I wanted to remember, share, I remember to at least jot it in a notebook. So we'll see what happens when I feel better and stronger. We'll see if I'm able to. Well, I should be able to keep writing. Yeah, we'll just see how long it takes.
That sounds good. Well, I wanted to ask you, Marie, can you tell everyone about how you worked with Kevin Gooden? Kevin Gooden is a poet who worked with Marie on her manuscript, and I just think it's an interesting process.
Oh, it was wonderful. I wasn't sure at first because a lot of these poems for the book came from the writing that I did during my MFA program. And so they, the poems that I had written were about family, about place. And some of them, so my mother is Inupiaq, but my father is a Puerto Rican. And my sister and I had visited Puerto Rico a couple of times, and I had written some poems about my Puerto Rican family. And they were originally in this book. And one of the first things that Kevin said was, the Puerto Rican poems, I know why you wrote them, and they're good poems, but they don't belong in this book. I was like, oh no. So one of the first things he did was to tell me that those needed to come out, and it was fine. And it made sense to take them out. There weren't very many, and it is a different family. But the process was really neat because he went through and explained to me how the book itself would have a beginning, a middle, and an end. How we learn about stories having a beginning, middle, and an end. And I thought that was so interesting. But he said that there should be an arc, to the whole of the book. And as we worked through that process, it took me a while, but I could start to see what the arc of the book was going to be and how all of the poems fit where they needed to fit. So it was a very good experience, and it was all done by email. And I thought that was really neat too.
That's really fabulous. Yeah, the whole notion, when I have been a judge for a first book contest, very often there will be manuscripts that 2/3 really hang together, they really belong together, and the other third are really strong poems that the person didn't want to leave out, but they don't belong in the book. And the writer has to have faith that there will be another book.
Exactly. That's it. You don't have to put everything into one poem or into one book. There will be another opportunity.
Absolutely. And Mia, did you consult with other people when you were putting together your novel?
Yeah, a lot of people actually. I had a lot of people who read it in different forms or, various phases of it, which I guess that's a good thing. Because after a while you just don't see it or you don't hear it as really well. And so it's kind of good to get other people's opinions. And and then I think by that time, when you hate it, you're like, okay, I'm done. So that's where I ended up. But yeah, I had a lot of help. As much as, I don't like people, it was useful. So.
Sometimes it's hard to keep from wearing out your friends because
yeah, I know, right?
I made some really big changes. Will you read it again?
Right.
Erin, what about you?
I used to have a really wonderful writing group here in Homer, a group of poets, Linda Martin and Mercedes Harness and Debbie Poor and Bill Numa. Think of that number of poets in a teeny tiny little town. And they got to read a lot of the poems in every atom. We would meet once a month. And that was really helpful. I also had my friend Kate, who, while her mother was ill, she and I talked on the phone, and then my mother was ill, and we talked on the phone, and it was like a little sounding board all the time. So, but I'm kind of like Mia. I'm like, I'd like to stay in my little room, please. so it's hard, and you don't want to wear out your little group of friends with like, here's my drama du jour. Will you read about it? So.
Excellent. Well, you've all done just a magnificent job with language and with crafting that language. Brenda Miller has a wonderful essay called Against Courage, because people will say to her, you're so brave to write about X, Y, or Z. And she said, no, what you're responding to is craft. And that I worked really hard at this craft. You're not responding to my courage. And I think that's really a good point, that you've all studied your craft and you've worked at it and over many years to make these books happen. Yeah. So Erin, what's next on the horizon for you?
I have another manuscript that's kind of floating around. And then I just haven't been, all the upheaval in the world lately, I don't have enough bandwidth to write. I'm trying, and it's so sad. Everything I try to write, I'm just like, okay, put that in the notebook and put it over there. So I'm not really, I want to. I mean, like, I feel like I want to, but it's not really happening quite yet. I'm trying to be patient with that too.
Yeah, there are people who can respond immediately to any situation and say something intelligent and say something in a beautiful way, like Rebecca Solnit. But I am not a person who can respond immediately and say something beautiful and intelligent. It takes me a while to process. Yeah, most of the time. What else? What don't you want to leave out of this event?
Can we not leave out thanking you and Red Hen Press for Boreal Books and creating this wonderful haven for Alaskan writers? I mean, it's hard for Alaskan writers to get their foot in the door because we don't get to go to cocktail parties with the people who are publishing books, but Boreal Books is such an honor to be part of.
Thank you.
I agree. Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you, Marie.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm beyond words of thankfulness.
Thank you. No, it's been a blast, as you can imagine. But the only problem is now I've said yes to too many, so we've got them on the schedule for about 4 years. And I don't think anybody should have to wait 4 years, but there you go. Okay, Toby, Monica, come back.
Oh, look at that.
Hello.
Wonderful people.
Like magic.
Toby and Monica make so much happen at Red Hen Press. And are you still working remotely?
We are indeed. We are in Los Angeles. We are legally not allowed to be at our offices, so here we are at our home offices.
And what about the smoke? Are you breathing smoke, or are you safe right now?
Not at this moment. The times of the orange apocalyptic sky are not here at the moment, but I hear that they might return in the next couple days. But we're all.
People in Orange County are being evacuated, huh?
Yeah, I believe so. We're definitely keeping an eye. I think we actually have some friends down there. We should check on. But yeah, so far we and our current locations are okay. But thank you.
Please take good care, and I really appreciate all that you do, both of you, in producing these books and making sure they get out in the world. And I'll tell you all, just a little bragging for Toby and Monica. Their national distributor, Ingram Books, has asked if they can teach people how to do what we've just done, because they do it better than anybody. So thank you. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. And all of you. It was such a great conversation, and I loved hearing about Alaska. It seems so beautiful, and I hope one day I can travel up there.
I hope you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you,
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Mia.
Count 'em up.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your beautiful words and for your reading today. We so appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
That's it.
Well,
We're done. It's over.
Yeah, that is our last of the Hen House Fall Book Tour series. As this world continues in the strange way that it has, I do think we'll keep on seeing you in the virtual screen, either through some of our other events. We have the Broad Stage, but I bet we're going to keep on doing virtual events into this new future that we're entering. So looking forward to seeing you all there. Thank you all so much again for tuning in, and see you soon.
See you soon.